Chapel buildings and architect. The design for the chapel building was put out to tender by the town commissioners, and the one chosen to be developed had been submitted by Charles Edward Davis, a 29-year-old architect who in 1863 went on to become a memorable city architect and surveyor of Bath.
During a long career, in which he restored several West Country churches, he also designed Trowbridge Cemetery, Bath Lower Bristol Road Cemetery, Bath's Empire Hotel, the Bath Royal Victoria Park, and was even responsible for discovering the Roman baths hidden amidst Georgian accretions. Pevsner is decidedly sniffy about Davis's work at the Empire Hotel, claiming the effect on the northeast view of the Abbey as disastrous. "What can have gone on in the mind of the architect?" he less than politely inquires in his Magisterial Buildings of England series. Nowadays, we view Victorian architects with more charitable acclaim.
As with many other new cemeteries, so Weston's included two mortuary chapels, one for a Church of England entry into heaven and the other for non-conformists. Ecumenism was then far from being fashionable, even when confronted by the Grim Reaper. The Church of England chapel is of simple cruciform shape, with steeply pitched roofs, and walls pierced on three sides by tall, slim, double-lancet, vaguely early 14th century style Gothic windows. The bell tower rises in three sections capped by an octagonal short spire. The approach to the chapel had been carefully determined so that the bell tower is directly aligned to the Bristol Road entrance gate. Unfortunately, the easterly non-conformist chapel was demolished in 1980, which has left the chapel resetting somewhat unbalanced. The chapels were built using stone quarried on site. The band of Carboniferous limestone is pink through iron oxidisation, and the same vein crops out further west at Anchor Head. The stone has been used at several other Western locations, for example Bristol Road Baptist Church, and its colour contrasts with the grey hue seen in most of the town's limestone structures. The softer and less durable Bath stone, which is easier to carve, has been used for door and window mouldings and on the tower and spire. Again, this combination is found throughout the 19th century stone town.
The Upper Gate Lodge in Bristol Road is from the same architect and also built of similar stone. Until 1917, it was the only lodge, for during the cemetery's first half-century or so of burials, there was only the one point of entry. Actual building of the chapels and the Upper Gate Lodge was entrusted to John Palmer, born 1806, died 1878, a local builder and sometime chairman of the town commissioners, the forerunner of the modern council.
The demolished chapel. The non-conformist chapel had a utilitarian, barn-like feel to its design, and by the 1970s was being described as a gaunt, bare, comfortless, shabby place. It is like some tomb, some sepulchre in which the light of the resurrection had shed no redeeming brightness. It is the end. It has little to do with the gospel of eternal life. Such strength of feeling expressed by the then rector of Weston-super-Mare brought the building tumbling to the ground in 1980, without any serious consideration being given to a makeover or alternative uses.
The bell is much older than the chapel, and its route to Milton Road is largely unknown. It's a 2.5-foot bell made by Leicester and Pack of London in 1766. An inscription reads, "The gift of Ralph Ward to Charlotte Chapel, anno 1766.
This proprietary chapel was opened in 1766 in Charlotte Street, Westminster, London. It was renamed the Palace Street in about 1883. King George III married Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz in 1761. Land in the ownership of a Mr. Ralph Ward was acquired at a peppercorn rent for the erection of a new chapel, and the royal chaplain, the Reverend William Dodd, persuaded the young Queen Charlotte to attend it and make it a fashionable place of worship. The chapel became known by the name of both its street and its royal benefactress. In 1924, it took on a completely different role as the St James Picture Theatre, and then in 1931 was converted into the Westminster Theatre.
The bell was cast in the Whitechapel foundry. This world-famous factory is said to be the nation's oldest continually running manufacturing company, established in 1570. By tradition, the names stamped on the bells are those of the master founder and the factory owner. Messrs. Leicester and Pack were in these positions between 1752 and 1769. Since 1968, the company has been known simply as the Whitechapel Bell Foundry Limited. But why and how did the bell come to Weston Cemetery Chapel? We don't know, is the short answer. Perhaps it was for sale and made its way onto a Victorian equivalent of eBay.
The cemetery extension. Between 1881 and 1891, Weston's population rose by 50%, and the cemetery began to suffer the same problem faced by churchyards before the advent of the municipal and private burial grounds. In order to extend burial facilities and create a sufficiently sizable land bank for future use, Weston-super-Mare Urban District Council set about purchasing neighbouring farmland from the estate of Ashcombe House in 1905. Progress on cemetery extension was not entirely free of controversy. In time-honoured fashion, the not-in-my-backyard position was argued. Every rod of land will be required for the homes of the living rather than the tombs of the dead. Dr. H. W. Hoffman, Inspector of Burial Grounds, was speaking with perhaps unintentional irony when he noted that ratepayers were expressing the gravest concern for their water supply. Mr. James Capel of Osborne House, the large detached property at the junction of Ashcombe Road and Locking Road, gave testimony that a 22-foot deep well at the bottom of Manor Road would be affected by its proximity to decaying corpses. It was said that, in a health resort such as Weston-super-Mare professes to be, and really is, there should not be room for even sentimental objections on the part of the public to its sanitary arrangements. Despite objections, the land was eventually acquired, and in the 1930s the driveway to Ashcombe House, together with Milton Road Gate Lodge, became the cemetery's new lower entrance. Soon afterwards the big house was given a new access road named the Drive, and converted into a maternity hospital. Ashcombe House was demolished in the 1980s as part of restructuring the town's hospital provisions, and the site is now occupied by modern housing. Nothing of that semi-rural estate, nor its neighbouring manor farm, now remain, other than the original driveway, gate lodge, and the ancient line of Manor Road.
Bronze Age burials. When the town commissioners chose this site for the new municipal cemetery, they were unaware that our prehistoric forebears had been laid to rest here already. Archaeologists have unearthed broken remains of Bronze Age funerary urns, some of which are thought to have originated in Cornwall. From about 650 BC, Worlbury Camp came into prominence as one of the most important Iron Age hilltop settlements in this part of the country, and burials from this period have also been unearthed in the immediate neighbourhood. Ancient and modern burials on the same site might suggest this is one of England's oldest currently operative cemeteries. The urns were discovered on the bank next to the groundsman's hut.
In the 1900s, up to the 1970s, located along the back wall of the cemetery, were a number of greenhouses used to bring on spring and summer plantings. For a small fee, family members could pay to have the grave of a loved one tended by the cemetery's ground staff. There were at one time 15 ground staff on site under the cemetery's superintendent, who would have resided at the Upper Lodge House.
Over 70,000 bodies lie interred in Milton Road Cemetery, although not all are marked. The cemetery contains many interesting graves, but nothing on the architecturally grand scale of Arno's Vale or Kensal Green. West Country understatement seems to have been the sepulchral watchword hereabouts. Nonetheless, there's a wealth of funereal symbolism to attract the inquiring mind, and the eternal residents offer a fascinating glimpse into various aspects of history, local, national, and international. Local dignitary Walton King had his memorial erected before meeting his maker, only to find that some vandal had daubed "Not Yet Dead, but Ought to Be" across the granite slab. Residents, prominent in national affairs, include Alfred Leet, whose Kitchener cartoon Your Country Needs You roused the nation's youngsters to volunteer for the front. Cardinal John Henry Newman, the 19th century theologian and philosopher, beatified by the Pope, had an estranged brother, Professor Francis William Newman, resident of Southside, and advocate of state education, very unpopular in Weston, who is also buried here. There are 46 burials from the First World War and 105 from the Second World War, including 23 members of the 9th Field Company Royal Engineers who died in their aircraft at Poulton in 1944.
When the Commonwealth War Graves Memorial was being constructed, a pit suddenly opened up, exposing remains of 1840s lead workings. The hut standing north of the memorial is the remains of what used to be the engine house. It was from here that material used to be sent to the lead smelter in Bristol, a reminder of times past when Worlbury Hill had quite a thriving mining industry.
Garden of Rest. The Garden of Rest was created in 1945. This was the first area provided for cremated remains in the cemetery.
War graves. This part of the cemetery is looked after by the War Graves Commission. Other war graves can be found scattered around the cemetery. There are in total 105 war graves from the Second World War and 46 from the First World War. On Remembrance Day, each and every war grave is adorned with a poppy. William Mole and Son were horticultural potters based in Bristol. They supplied plants for the Arboretum, including over 100 species of trees. Thomas North was the groundsman, paid £1 a week. He lived at the Upper Lodge and was still tending plots at the age of 73. As gravedigger, he charged 1 shilling per foot per grave.
Civilian war graves. The overgrown civilian war graves from World War II were uncovered in 2006 and 2007. The first stone uncovered led to further investigation. The ground staff on site have lifted the stones above grass level and enhanced the area with planting and a provision of a new bench.
Located on the south-facing slope of Worlbury Hill, the cemetery rises to 140 foot above sea level, affording extensive views across Weston toward the nearby Mendip Hills. These Carboniferous limestone slopes of Worlbury, separated by numerous small valleys or combes, developed over 200 million years ago, during the Triassic period. Ridges remain high beside these eroded combes. Upon one such ridge stands the modern war memorial. Debris eroded from the old bedrock lies along the combe bottoms as dolomitic conglomerate, angular fragments of yellowish limestone. Soft red mudstones are also found in these combe bottoms, rocks that began life as wind-blown dust from the ancient basin between Wilbury and the Mendip Hills. During this period, the old basin sometimes turned into a lake, fed by water running off the surrounding higher land. In more recent geological periods, this Triassic landscape was covered by newer rocks, which have themselves been removed, once again exposing the underlying conglomerate and the mudstones.
This section is about part of the cemetery lying east of the main path that runs from Milton Road entrance to the upper Victorian part of the cemetery. There is the existence of Roman-British archaeology. 2 small pieces of Romano-British pottery have been found by local historian Chris Richards. 1 pottery shard in the memorial garden and in the earth of a nearby grave. About 400 feet east of these shards, some human skeletons, at least 1,000 years old, came to light in the garden of a house in Manor Road in the 1980s.
The area appears to have been part of the Manor of Ashcombe mentioned in the Domesday Book, so it is therefore of at least Anglo-Saxon foundation. Actual settlement here seems to have been in the present Manor Road. Judging from the location of the manor house and its adjoining farm buildings, animal pound and cottages all now demolished, small plots, such as the memorial garden, some with cottages on them on the 19th century maps, are a feature of the medieval street of Manor Road. It could be that the memorial garden once contained a cottage.
A medieval landscape can be detected. This part of the cemetery was cultivated at least as early as Anglo-Saxon or medieval times. A feature of the south side of Wilbury was the open field system.
Southern Wilbury Hill was cultivated as far back as Anglo-Saxon days, with strips of fertile land arranged in parallel blocks divided by low ridges, forming a north-south corrugated landscape within the combes. Open pasture and coppice occupied the upper, less fertile and rockier heights. A still prominent bank to the north and west marks this change in historic land use. Today's main footpath leading halfway up the hill from Milton Road forms the old limit of westward cultivation. This boundary of cultivation then moves eastward from the points where the steps lead down to the right. Here the old field bank leaves the path and makes for the granite seat at the top edge of the cemetery. It is a plainly evident embankment. This boundary then progresses east to the present and much later wall, where it turns south down the far side of the combe, skirting the memorial gardening on the east. The lower or south side of this ancient open field meets the former moor along what is now Milton Road, but used to be called Drawway Lane, the old drove or trackway along which agricultural carts progressed. In 2009, the Town Council were awarded £6,500 from the Aggregate Levy Sustainable Fund. This money has paid for 250 linear metres of native hedging. This hedging runs across the back wall and down the east wall of the cemetery. All benches have been refurbished and bird, bat and owl boxes have been installed.
The 1838 tithe map shows this large field to have been subdivided. The upper part is an orchard, while the lower part is pasture and called Home Close. Brockham's is the name given to a tiny plot of arable land adjoining the southwest corner. The linear strip on the steep ground to the west is shown as woodland or brake.
On the 1883 Ordnance Survey map, Ashcombe House has been developed into the fine-looking mansion evident in photographs. The house was served by a fine sweeping drive from the southwest corner of Home Close, with a gatehouse on Milton Road, and also in Home Close with a wide spaced trees, so that the whole looked like a gentleman's park. A long line of trees had been planted up the western boundary. The plot at the rear is still there unchanged in shape, with T-shaped path arrangement. It looks like a kitchen garden. The plantation is still east of the house and contains a quarry. The area called Ashcombe Batch on the tithe map is shown as treeless.
James Capel of Ashcombe was the man responsible for Ashcombe House. And Ashcombe House was a richly decorated Victorian mansion. It faced south, was of 3 bays and 3 stories, with the top story lit by dormer windows in a mansard roof. The house was a Red Cross hospital during the First World War. It suffered a serious fire in 1918, but was restored in a much pared-down manner and looked quite plain. In 1946 it was opened as a maternity hospital by the Duchess of Kent. This was closed in 1986 and the house demolished in 1987. Where Ashcombe House once sat is now the new red brick housing estate.
The elaborate porch was in the centre. It was richly embellished block with steps up to it. Flanking were 2 ornate columns supporting an entablature with a parapet above, with panels carved with floor design and finials of orbs. The door space was round-headed, with 2 windows. On each side of the porch were semicircular or bow-fronted bay windows, reaching the height of the ground floor with a parapet above, inset with panels carved with floor designs, and on the ground floor and the second story was lit with rather plain windows. The dormer windows were splendidly framed and in freestanding shaped gables caped with pediments. The centre gable was flanked on each side by finial obelisk terminating in a sphere on each side. This decoration occurring at the front corners of the house. There are also carved cornices and string courses.